Hi everybody again. This is nice. Got our last session. Come on in, get comfortable. You can relax now. All the hard work is done. It's only just starting. No, seriously. We are really honoured again. We both live in London, right?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, but we hadn't seen each other in London. And more, we've been like, let's go to Wales.
Exactly, it's true, yeah.
Should go to Glasgow.
Everywhere
Excellent.
else around the country.
Where should we go next?
Oh God, I don't even know.
We go on holiday. We go to Ireland.
Somewhere hot.
Okay, we won't go to Ireland. Can I just check with tech that Kwajo's mic is on? Is that on? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Can you all hear Kwajo as much as you can hear my loud mouth?
Closer. Do you know what? Let me just hold it closer. I'm being lazy. I wasn't going to start singing. I just didn't want to hold anything.
Hold me close. Okay, no. That was the second. Well, I'm really channeling some cheesy old school vibes with the songs I'm going for today. Anyway, we've got about 25 minutes to have a chat with Kwajo. This is Kwajo Tweneboa for all of you who don't know or have been living under a rock the last year. I know, joking. And Kwajo is a campaigner for social housing and just generally better quality housing for everybody, and largely driven by being completely fed up that why are we still, in this day and age, putting up with really poor quality housing. And then also, as I think we've watched your work progress, we've seen how you're pulling at a string that suddenly is unraveling this huge, big system piece, and surely now nobody can stand up and go anything but, yeah, totally agree with that. So what are we going to do about it? So, Kwajo Tweneboa, would you like to just take the floor? Take the floor. Take it away in song. No.
Thank you. I'm just going to start by, because you know by now I've got a memory of a goldfish. So later on, if I forget, hopefully I don't, but if I do, I'm going to turn around and say, what have I forgotten? And it's a special shout out to someone, and it's Sweater Braverman. So if I forget, just remind me. Okay. It's not a good shout out, by the way, just in case. I don't want you to start throwing anything at me. There will be a special
wait for it.
Yeah,
I feel like it's going to be really freeing.
For her. So my name's Kwajo Tweneboa. I may have seen some of you at some of the other events, Wales, London, maybe even last year, potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you go to Birmingham as well? Were you in Birmingham?
Not this year, no.
Last year. The year
last
before.
year, yeah. And yes, I'm a housing campaigner, and I've been doing it for the last 3 years. It started off predominantly social housing, and that's because I've lived in social housing the majority of my life, and it was very poor quality social housing for anyone that's seen my story. And it started off with me and my sisters and my dad living in temporary accommodation, and he had applied to get into social housing. It was an absolute nightmare. But anyway, we were placed into temporary accommodation. It happened to be a converted car garage, so it still had the garage door on. We had issues like damp, mould. We had an ant infestation. We had a bathroom that, I can't even call it a bathroom, it was a cupboard that you could squeeze a shower into, and a toilet, and a very small sink. And I was studying for my A-levels. My sister was studying for her GCSEs at the time. And it was horrific. Like, we wouldn't have no one round, the stigma of shame and everything that came along with you're not going to invite anyone to come round to your home, and then in fact it's actually a garage, because it is just, and for young kids too, very, very embarrassing to even admit that that's the circumstances you are in. And I was studying for my A-levels, my sister for her GCSEs. And I remember when we were there, and it was 2017, because I remember waking up one morning and seeing Grenfell on the TV, on BBC News. My dad had left the TV on, and it was an aerial shot of Grenfell Tower in the early hours of the morning, still burning. And at the time, I didn't immediately understand what I was looking at. I thought it was a building on fire. I didn't put two and two together for a few seconds, I'd say, and realised that there were actually people that were trapped in Grenfell. And it wasn't until I did that I then realised, like, people in social housing really aren't cared about enough. And I mean, they're they're seen as subhuman. And that was the first instance that really shocked me, and I realised that it was outside just mine and my family situation where people were being affected. And then we moved into the home that I'm currently in now on the Eastfields estate in South London, and my dad was very grateful because it took many, many years to get, so he wasn't going to turn it down, because if you do turn down a social housing property, it doesn't matter what condition it is, you are then choosing to be intentionally homeless, and the local authority have no responsibility then to cater to your needs. So he accepted it, and it was in poor conditions. We had cockroaches, mice, damp, mould. We had lights filled with water. We had a kitchen that was nearly 100 years old, filled with damp. We had poor security to the house. We had a bathroom which wasn't fit for use. The lights were filled with rainwater, and things were... It can only be described as slum conditions. And my dad in 2018 became ill. He was diagnosed with stage 1 esophageal cancer in those conditions. And for those of you that don't know, it's a tumour in your esophagus. And he, after a while, could no longer eat. He could no longer drink. He could no longer swallow his saliva. And he became increasingly weaker and weaker to the point he could no longer walk. So he was in a hospital bed in our living room in those conditions, being fed through his stomach 3 times a day by district nurses that were coming in. And they were absolutely horrified with the conditions that he was in, and as well as dealing with our dad having cancer and things were getting worse, we also were having to explain as to why he was in the conditions that we had found ourselves in and nothing was being done. And it was very, very embarrassing. Me and my sisters had up until that point never dealt with grief. We had never lost anyone near us. No one had ever become ill. So it was very, very difficult. And then he passed away in January 2020. And things went from bad to worse. On the day of his funeral, a month later, the 28th of February 2020, a ceiling above his hospital bed caved in because of a leak. And that was in February, and no one came out until October that year to look at it. And then when they did pull it down, it contained asbestos, and they didn't tell us, and left dust everywhere. And we thought maybe it would be a week or 2 before our ceiling was put back up, bearing in mind we still had the cockroaches and everything else that they hadn't dealt with, but they didn't put it up in October. They didn't put it up until January the following year. So we went through Christmas with no ceiling, no front. It was literally a building site. And whilst we were chasing the other work, I was getting increasingly more and more frustrated. I was struggling with mental health, as it is, losing my dad. I was suicidal at the time. I was suffering with depression and anxiety and was given medication for that. And my patience was wearing very thin with my housing provider, to the point where one day I was at work in a secondary school and I was phoning them. I was spending more time, I did spend more time at work on the phone chasing up my housing provider than I did actually doing my job. And I did admit that to my boss afterwards, and she completely understood, and she was sad about that. But one day I tried to ring them. They were extremely dismissive on the phone after promising they would come out. The person on the other side of the phone said, "We're not coming out. We don't have anyone currently, and we're not sure when we're coming out. No one can come out today," and hung the phone up on me. And it was at that moment that I decided that was it. I've had enough. I wasn't going to go back to them. I said the next person that was going to go back to them would be journalists, and that's exactly what happened. Because I went into my home and took pictures and videos, and I uploaded it to social media. It went viral. And then my housing provider, Clarion, that happens to be the biggest social housing provider in Europe, or it was at least then, turned around and said, "We're sorry that Kwajo feels as though him and his family didn't receive the service that they deserved." And I didn't really have a response to that. Actually, I did. My response was to go around every single home on my estate and knock on every single door and go into every single home and ask them to send me pictures of videos of the conditions that they're living in, and they absolutely did. And I uploaded it to social media, and in a lot of instances, it was worse than what I was even in. And it went absolutely viral. There was one woman, she was in her 60s, having to go to B&Q and buy cement and mix it in her kitchen to fill holes that mice were coming through, and she had been suffering with that for 27 years, and nothing had been done. And there was others. There was kids that I was teaching who during lockdown, they were having online learning, and ceilings were caving in next to them. I've in the past taken people to A&E because the ceilings caved in on them, and ITV News came down, done a 2-week undercover investigation with myself and the people in my estate, and disgraced our landlord into having to spend almost, I think it was over £20 million, not just on my estate, replacing all the ceilings and roofs because of how bad leaks were, but to go around the other estates in my local borough, because they were also run by that provider in the same condition, and do the exact same there. And from that, because it was quite high profile in the news and in Parliament, People are reaching out to me from across London and then across the UK, wanting me to help them. Some instances, people dying with terminal illnesses, terminal cancer. There was one lady living in a home filled with damp and mold, and she had stage 4 lung cancer. There was another mum who had stage 4 breast cancer, and all she wanted was my help in order to get her flat sorted, so that, because she had a son at the time, so that he would be fine after she had passed away. That was all she was cared. That's all she had cared about. And there was instances where I'd gone into homes where they were living with cockroaches for 10 years, and gone in, taken pictures, videos, uploaded to social media, and then moved within 24 hours. Or they had the work sorted, and that was happening time and time again. And I still do that even now. But the reality is, I think everyone in the room would admit, no one should have to do the job that I'm doing now. There should be no room for the job that it is that I'm doing now. And I think that's a massive part of the problem. What myself and other campaigners, other campaign groups around the country were able to do was sort of open a can of worms. An issue that was very much brushed under the carpet, but one that had existed for generations, especially within social housing. We know what the stigma was like. We know there's archive footage out there of tenants living in homes with damp and mold back in the 70s and being blamed, open your windows. It's condensation, it's lifestyle, it's this, it's that. And even now, even today, the same things are happening. It wasn't until young Alb Ishak in 2020 passed away, the 2-year-old boy living in Rochdale, which a lot of you will be aware of. He died as a result of living in a home with damp and mold. And his mum and parents had been complaining before he was even born about that, but he was ignored. It was blamed on lifestyle. They were told that damp and mold in their home was due to ritual bathing, even though the majority of the estate also had issues with damp and mold in their home. What is ritual bathing? I think that's the first question we need to ask. But they happened to be a family that had migrated. They came as refugees from Africa, and they were over here, and no doubt that's why the term was created and directed at them. So there's a lot of issues within housing, and it's down to classism, racism, but ultimately people's lives. People are ultimately paying the ultimate price, and that is with their lives, whether it be Grenfell, whether it be Our Bishak, whether it be the people's homes that I go into where they're dying of terminal cancer, whether it be young kids developing asthma as a result of living in homes and being born into homes with damp and mold, whether it be cramped conditions, whether it be people suffering with their mental health. Only last week, a man that was under the same housing provider as myself, so Clarion, and this is bearing in mind 3 years on after I gave them absolute hell for the conditions they had us in. It was revealed in The Guardian. You may have seen it was quite high profile. He had been complaining about antisocial behaviour and noise for 9 months. He had struggled with mental health. His GP, he had complained over 20 times to Clarion about it. His GP complained to them twice about the fact that it had been disturbing him so much that he attempted to take his own life twice. And they described him as whining. He then took his own life on the 3rd attempt, and that was in the news, and it was revealed only last week. And this is again 3 years on after me complaining. That goes to show that that attitude and culture, which I think is so systemic and the basis of all of these problems, is still happening even now, even after we've seen the likes of Grenfell and Our Bishak. And it's an issue that's not going to be fixed overnight, and housing is something that definitely needs to be prioritised, especially the quality of housing. But fundamentally, the first thing that needs to change is attitude and culture. And this is the big shout out to Suella. Because we would have heard only in the last few days, we talk about attitude and culture. When she turns around and says being homeless is a choice, or is it a lifestyle choice? That was the words that she used? Or she suggests that people that are homeless living on the street should have their tents destroyed. That is what I mean when I talk about, well, first and foremost, gutter politics from gutter politicians, but secondly, the attitude and culture between against those that are worst off within society, within housing, and don't have access to housing in a lot of cases. They are still demonized, and it's used as a weapon against them, even when they are struggling. I mean, it says something when we worry about the way in which people that have to see homeless people are feeling, never mind those that are actually in the tents, having to sleep on the cold pavements during winter, having nowhere to go back to call home, or the 131,000 homeless kids in England alone. or the family that's been handed a Section 21 notice every 8 minutes up and down England, or the 1.4 million people waiting to get into social housing. The attitude, the things that we worry about isn't to do with them and how they may feel and their suffering, but our perception of them. And that is what is wrong, I think, with housing at the moment, and why it hasn't been seen as a priority it needs to. Instead of seeing housing as a necessity, we've been seeing it, a lot of government have been viewing it as, well, actually, instead of it being a necessity, there's been this change to, no, it's how we view it as an asset, and how we view it as an accumulation and representation of one's wealth. And it's as a result of that where we've got a situation now, whereas for many actually, instead of seeing housing as a necessity that we should all have the right to some it's seen as a luxury because they don't have it and don't know if they'd ever be able to attain it. That's why we're seeing some of the highest rates of homelessness that we are now, or that if people are in social housing, they're being offered social housing, which again can only be described as slum conditions or in terribly poor conditions. And it's not just social housing. You look at the private rented sector too. You look at how much people are having to spend every month on their rent. The fact that even when mortgages were going up and increasing, the majority of that was being passed on to tenants, when we had even seen some of the highest prices for rent across the country as it is, and that was before any of that. And the lack of urgency or need to address or change that. Why? Because for some reason money's being seen as, and accumulated money is being seen as more important than people's lives and the need and necessity for shelter and a roof over your head. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs states that everyone needs shelter in order to function properly. And I always say, wherever there's a crisis, there's an opportunity to exploit, and that is what we're seeing with housing. We know that housing to everyone is viewed as a necessity. Everyone wants shelter, everyone wants housing, but for some reason it's now become so competitive that it's no longer an option for absolutely everyone. Some will and some won't. And as a result, there's room for exploitation there, and that's simply what's been happening, not just for the last year and a half or 3 years that I've been going into people's homes, but for generations. And I think it's so important to reimagine what our futures are like, and not in regards to just building homes and the quality of homes, but also reimagining what culture and attitudes needs to be like towards those, especially those renting or those wanting to own their own home or those looking to get into social housing or social housing tenants in general, because it's not until we change that anything else can be fixed. And I think we as individuals should feel compelled to want to do that, not just for ourselves, but for future generations too. We need to be planting those seeds that future generations will be able to reap the benefits from, because if we had that decades ago, perhaps we wouldn't be in the situation that we are now. But I think the state of housing in this country has become so dire, and loads of us are talking about it. Loads of us are individually and as groups trying to create change and push this message, and it's really important. And I mentioned this the last time, this idea that as an individual, I am Kwajo Tweneboa, Kwajo Housing. I talk about social housing, the poor conditions people are living in. But there are so many different groups up and down the country. There's Civic Square, there's London's Renters Union, there's Acorn, there's Shelter, there's all of these other charities and groups and individuals doing exactly the same. And I think collectively we have to realise that as a group and doing this together and getting these conversations going and getting people who may not necessarily talking about housing is ultimately what is going to generate that change and demand for change too. But also putting pressure on the likes of our ignorant, in some cases, politicians that do need a massive wake-up call and so out of touch of people's struggles, especially currently off of the back of the cost of living crisis and the global pandemic. They don't understand what it's like, and even those that say they do really don't, because I mean all of them are on decent salaries, all of them are receiving 80k plus of taxpayers' money, they're getting their homes expensed in many cases. They don't understand what the everyday issues are for people that are renting, people that are in social housing, people that are homeless, and it's about keeping those conversations going and pushing for the likes of retrofitting homes, and also worrying about the homes of our future and climate change, because those are huge issues that need to be addressed now. Climate change, for example, and global warming, and building and homes and making homes more efficient. We've been talking about building homes to make sure they're warm during winter. But during summer last year, I got one of the biggest shocks I've had campaigning so far, and that was when we had 40 degrees temperatures, the highest temperatures on record for this country, and I was receiving messages from tenants no longer about cockroaches, mice, damp, mold, but the fact that they were absolutely boiling in their homes, and they were living in tower blocks built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even only 20 years ago, and are really, really, really struggling. But again, that's something that's not taken into consideration. And if we are knocking up these homes like the government says they want to do, or Labour say they want to build 1.5 million homes, but we're not taking this into consideration, then we think we've got a housing crisis now. But in 20 years' time, if we don't cater to these needs and these issues and aren't having these conversations, making sure homes are built correctly, we're going to have an even bigger housing crisis then. So there are a lot of issues, there are a lot of problems within housing. Do I believe we can create the change? Absolutely, by having the right conversations. Can we do it, or can I do it as an individual? No, I think collectively we all have a role to play in this, and we should be pushing and demanding from our politicians, getting into those rooms with developers, having conversations, feeling like we deserve to be in those rooms, feeling like our voices matter, because ultimately it's us all that are going to be on the receiving end of any policies or decisions that's made by those in charge. Thank you. I could go on.
I know you can.
Thank you.
In my head, I don't know if you could hear the tick each time one of the questions that I had stored in there just got answered through that incredibly passionate, like, I feel like there's like that need to like breathe out. First of all, thank you for sharing that story again. It's a lot to have to go so deep into an incredibly personal and very traumatic story, and to do that again and again and again. You can't desensitize yourself from your own lived experience. So I recognize that takes something from you each time. And so that's a gift to all of us that we should be really, really grateful for. And I know I am very grateful for that, for you. Anybody who was here this morning and saw the sort of like the outward spiraling impacts of underperforming housing slide that was shown. So we have in the centre of that this underperforming housing, and then how the costs and the impacts of that spin out across all sorts of places in society, and largely from the different departments and agencies from the government and public sector, who are then continually defunded and underfunded to address. And a lot of that stuff then gets picked up in community spaces and things like that as well. And you have just given us like the lived experience story of that slide, which is really impactful for information and data. But that's what that slide means. What you've just explained is what that means. And I think where the slide stops being effective and you start is when we see that quantified, like, oh yes, and then the problem is dealt with there. That's not a static, there is a problem. That's somebody living that day in, day out, and that impact and that multiplicity of problems impacting their lives. So I think I'm just reflecting on where we started this morning, and how the story that you've told talks about the impact of underperforming housing and the shocking conditions that people are still having to go through, and you must just continually to be inundated with people sharing their story, in seeing you as a beacon of hope, which is then yet another layer of responsibility on your shoulders to have to own and take on. And I know you've talked, and I'd like to get into a little bit more about what you were saying about other campaigners and collaborators. But the other thing that you talked about, which I think is so important, and when you talk about slum conditions, and we all saw in Glasgow and in Dublin and in all those cities that had slum conditions, that bright sparks went, oh yeah, let's build housing out there, but let's cut corners and not put any of the community services and resilience building capacities and infrastructures in there. in the post-war years, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and it happening over and over again, just points to the fact that this is that systems problem that we've been trying to unpick underneath all those things that we've been exploring today. So I think it's really, important that we galvanize around movements like the one that you're describing in the places where we can, along those leverage points of influence. So where you have influence and opportunity within what you are interacting with in your spaces, that's where we have the impact, and we have to keep our eyes on that sort of big systems change part of that. And I'm just sort of thinking and reflecting on what you were saying and what we've all been coming at, and finding ways for us all to feel like, what can we do where we are currently? There's John. What we can where we are with what we've got. So what can we do there, and how do we do that collectively is really important for all of us to be thinking about, I think. But in terms of, you're wheeled out as the poster boy on all the TV shows. They're like, get Kwajo in, get Kwajo in, get Kwajo. You must be like, oh my God. Can I just send like a hologram of myself, please? I'm tired over here. I said it once. How many more times do you need to hear me say it? Who else is out there that you're finding, is there movement support building? I know, again, there's London's Renters Union and others. You talk a little bit about where you're seeing support coming from other campaigners and groups, and also, or is it? And also, what are the things that you see, okay, next move is, I can't keep receiving you will continue to receive them because you've already shown that you are that kind of beacon of care. So as you receive those, what are the infrastructures that we need to transition and unlock, through those? It's a really powerful way that you're using shame to do that, and I think that we need to do that, but it's also exhausting, because why do we have to go to the base limit of shame to just do right by people? So what are those support mechanisms that you either are seeing coming in or that you want to see coming in from your position as like a campaigner?
Those are very good questions. In regards to support, it's very weird actually, because you could tell from my story that I never set out to become a campaigner. I didn't wake up and think, do you know what I want to be today, a campaigner?
But you're an amazing artist as well. If you have not seen
that's what I wanted to do, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Can you share? It's have you seen his paintings? It's like, it's amazing.
I do. I mean, it's Art by Kwajo on Instagram.
You heard it, go Art by Kwajo, right? How many of you are in the room? 100 people, 100 new followers.
Paintings there.
Now.
I haven't painted in so long because I'm doing this, but
let the man paint.
But it is what I wanted to do actually. Long term, I did want to just fully do art, but I think my life's just gone off on a tangent at the moment. I might go back there, digress back. But in terms of the campaigner title, it was almost as if, first and foremost, I wanted my situation sorted, but also they had annoyed me by making that comment. We're sorry that Kwajo feels as though him and his family hasn't received the service that they deserve. And at that point, I was like, that was sort of like the flame that lit the match sort of thing. And I thought, right, I'm going around to all of my estate and I'm going to make you fix all of them too and have to pay for it. And then after that, I decided I didn't want to stop. I couldn't just pull up the ladder behind me. I knew that people around the country, and I think there's a lot of that. I think that's almost something I think I want people to change as human beings, as society is. This idea that if we can, we should help others too. We shouldn't just pull up the ladder behind us because we sorted our situation, because there's going to be someone in that same situation you were when you wished that there was someone there to help you and take you out of that situation. I think absolutely you should. It's the most fulfilling and rewarding work that I've done. And then in terms of appreciation, it's happened from everyone, I think, and that's, for me, especially in the beginning, what made me recognise it's worth doing. It's working what I'm doing. It's worth doing what it is that I'm doing, because people are actually listening. They're acknowledging it. When you've got people that are living in those conditions coming up to me and saying, "Thanks so much for talking about it," because we were so ashamed and we didn't want to speak about it. But now you've allowed for that conversation to happen and remove that stigma in doing so. So. There's been a lot of appreciation in that sense, but also from other groups to from Shelter, London's Renters Union, Acorn, Coffee a Freak, Abdi earlier on, who I think is absolutely amazing. He's had a similar situation to me. He's actually with the same housing provider as me too, and knows them very well, just as well as I do.
There's nearly a pattern there.
Yeah, exactly. Get rid of Clarion. So there's loads of groups out there that have shown real support. But I think what people liked about it most, especially in the beginning, was seeing someone, an ordinary individual from an estate, who was perhaps, and this is why I really like the concept of the underdog, and I'd always support the oppressed and the underdogs, was that idea that, oh, he's come off of an estate, he's known nothing about housing, he's got no degree in it, nothing, but he's still been able to take on Europe's biggest social housing provider. And I think for loads of people that...
Imagine having a degree in housing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, then
I know.
you're the oracle right here. Like.
They should start for some of these housing providers.
The University of Kwajo, let's sign up.
Yeah. Get all these chief executives on $500,000 a year down there. But I think people and ordinary people liked that. I think it showed them that, and that's what I wanted it to show them, that your voice absolutely does matter. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter your background, your class, your race. It doesn't matter what your age was. And I know when I started campaigning that I was going into rooms and they were looking at me like I was an alien, like, what does this 21-year, why is he telling us about housing? What the hell does he know, sort of thing? And it wasn't until I stayed persistent and consistent that they actually, and I was determined. I didn't care how old I was. I didn't care who it was that I was talking to. I didn't care if I was sat opposite Michael Gove, and I made sure I made that case when I went into the Home Office. The point was, if you're sitting opposite me and you wouldn't want to live in these conditions, then there's no excuse as to why anyone else should have to live in them too, regardless of their race or their background. And I was determined to push that. And shame works. Shame is absolutely huge. It's one of the, when I started it, I was like, it was almost like a light bulb bingo moment that I realized, and I realize now, there is nothing more expensive to an organization than being shamed and publicly shamed too. Nothing more expensive than that. It could cost them their reputation, it could cost them financially, it could cost them absolutely everything. And it's the same with politicians, it's the same with celebrities. No one likes shame. The moment you, actually, I say politicians, I mean, some of them have no shame. That's a problem. But for the majority, shame really, really works, and it certainly has in this regard, because what was happening was not only was I shaming them online, but then there was interest from the likes of Good Morning Britain and BBC seeing the conditions people are having to live in. And then when they pick it up, that's the real shame. When you're put on national television at 6 p.m. And you've got 55 million people viewing it and viewing your organisation negatively, that's when they start moving and actually start listening. It may not necessarily be when that one individual comes and is yapping at their heels, but when you're on par now with the whole news organisation and they're disgracing you nationally, that's when they start listening and think we need to change. Why? Because that's when people start losing their jobs. That's when the boards start getting involved and chairs start asking questions, and your job as a chief executive then starts coming into question. That's when when you start threatening their sort of livelihood, that's when you realise people start realising about what's right and all suddenly have morals. And it shouldn't take that. It really, really shouldn't take that, but it does. And that's why shame has been so powerful. I wouldn't be where I am right now if first and foremost it wasn't for shame. But also, it wasn't for shame on social media, because I could have been out there and I could have taken to the streets and I could have tried to get as many people as possible down to Downing Street and just absolutely shouted as much as possible, and I still wouldn't have got the same response as I have on social media, because now social media is so powerful. Like, we talk about it being negative, but at the click of a button, you could reach millions of people with one post. And it's not just millions of people here or in London, it's millions of people not just across the UK, but across the world. And when you're getting into the DMs and inboxes of politicians and chief executives and those sort of important people, that's when you start to get traction with campaigning and campaign groups, because that's when they started reaching out to me for the work that I was doing, because they were seeing it and they felt ashamed that I was going into their constituencies and disgracing the conditions people are having to live in there. Why? Because that then threatens their seat at the next general election. So that is, I think, prime example of how shame works in different areas for different groups of people, and why ultimately you then start seeing change and traction and movement from different groups of people around one issue.
But you've given legitimacy and you've shifted the balance of responsibility as well, which I think goes really far in terms of that stigma. We talked in Bristol about, we were talking about the different scales. We talked about the scale of the house and doing justice to that. And it shouldn't be on a person's shoulders to carry the shame of the conditions that they have no choice than other to live. And actually, that the shame sits with the providers who don't value the fact that fundamentally it is about creating a place to allow people to thrive, people to live, people to have access to the bare. I mean, you mentioned Maslow's triangle, and the fact that, you know, that's even a thing that we have to be contesting now. But I think there is a really important shift there that, you know, the movement that you've been championing has really done to sort of take that burden off people's shoulders and say, no, it's okay. And it's okay for me to step out and say, look at what these conditions are that we are being forced to live in. So I think that's actually can't be underestimated either, that power of legitimacy and removing shame from people's shoulders. So that, again, is just incredible. I think have we got any more time, or where are we at with time, Amy? Yeah? So would anybody like to have some questions? And I'm going to, have we got, oh, we do. There you go. There you go, runner. He's great. We will have a few questions, and then we will break and we will change over this room, and we will come back in for the Kaylee, just so anybody who maybe came in just for this bit and doesn't know about the plans for the evening. Yeah, we've got one there just behind Mariana, and one in the front after that.
Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, it's on. Hang on. I made a note. So one of the things that I made a note about was potentially this needs to go further, i.e. people's healths are being affected by these bad conditions, and potentially these people who are being affected need to start class actions against the providers who are basically impacting on their health. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
No, you're absolutely right, and I can actually give you the statistics and figures for it. I mean, last year, £1.4 billion, I nearly said million, it's £1 billion was spent looking after people living in poor conditions as a result of their health being impacted. £34 million was spent last year looking after people's health as a result of living in homes with damp and mould, so that's asthma and all other sort of conditions that developed as a result of that. So you're absolutely right when you're saying people's health is being affected. In terms of class action, I think that would be great too if there were situations where, because it's a human right. It's a human right, and it's a human right that's being violated. And it's not like it's being violated on one occasion. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people living in disrepair and having their health put at risk. And that's 6.5 years on after Grenfell. So you're absolutely right. I think there needs to be more sort of legal action against providers. I also think that laws need to change and be a lot stricter. Criminal law needs to change because at the moment, even you just look at Grenfell and the fact that no one as of yet has been prosecuted for that, or no one's been held to account. What incentive is there to be? I mean, you flip this. If it was the NHS, for example, and a doctor or nurse was found to have been neglecting tenants, like in the case of Al Bishak, and as a result, a child died as a result of their negligence, not only would there be struck off, there would be an investigation and potentially criminal prosecution as a result of that. Why is it any different in housing? Why is it any different when people die as a result of what should be corporate, by any definition, corporate manslaughter? Because it's down to their neglect that they have deteriorated, they've become unwell, a ceiling has collapsed on them because they've been complaining for weeks, if not months, about cracks, and then the ceiling's come down and injured them. Or I had one lady, for example, I was actually helping the lady below, it was a block of flats, and I was helping the lady below her who had sewage running down her wall. And I had gone into the house above to speak to her, and she was in a sling, she was in a cast, and I asked her what happened. She had told me what had happened. They'd come to see what was causing the leak below. They had unscrewed her kitchen cupboards. They had hooked it back up. They hadn't screwed it back. And she was there cooking. She had the cooker on. She was boiling water. And the cupboards were filled with plates and all sorts and came down on top of her. It hit her on the head, knocked her unconscious, and broke her collarbone. And her kids were outside, and the cooker had been left on, and she was knocked out for a long while. That could have killed her, or had it been her child, could have easily killed them. And that's what I mean when I say there's so many close calls within housing, even after Grenfell, where I'm surprised. I wouldn't even be shocked if people have died, but it just hasn't made headlines. And that won't change until there is a sort of incentive for... We can change laws in terms of, we need to be treating tenants better, blah, blah, blah. But if we're not actually putting real regulations there and really setting a bar saying, if someone dies as a result of your negligence or corporate manslaughter, you will go to jail for it. If you're found guilty, you will go to jail for it. Because it's not until that happens that people actually start thinking, no, we need to take this seriously. Because there are actual repercussions to our action. Yeah. That should be enough. Yeah. But it's not. And that's normally situations like that I've seen time and time again where doctors, nurses, head teachers are writing in regards to that guy that I mentioned that took his own life because of noise complaints. His GP had written to Clarion twice. And often what happens is they don't even get a response. They don't even respond back to them. They are those that like self-assured in getting away with absolutely everything that they don't even feel the need to respond to these professionals when they have concerns. And that's why we need change. You're true.
The government sort of feeds into this in terms of that, like, you don't have any refusal cases. You just have to take it, which means that basically the government is working hand in hand with these people.
Yeah. It's true.
We'll go to Gia.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for also mentioning the value of shame, because like I've spent a lot this morning talking about how like if you want to make wins, we have to be prepared to be confrontational. So some of the experiences that you're describing, like the same as what we're seeing in Glasgow. So I was talking to a guy the other day, he has no teeth because the mould in his house was that bad that it's rotted his teeth, and he has breathing problems, and as you said, it was suicidal and can't work anymore because of how bad the mental health impacts were of that, and his housing situation has pretty much just ruined his whole life. And it's really good that he is now engaged in living rent, so like kind of like very similar to Acorn down south, and we're doing like member defence against him. But what the biggest target in Scotland is this company called Wheatley Homes. It's just terrible. Like there's so many people in that situation, and it's not just living rent that are going after them. It's the Wynford Residents Union who spoke earlier this morning as well. And I'm hoping that like the organisation I'm a part of can support that fight. But like how we actually do this effectively, because it's like these people are so high up and have so much power, and like even when people are going to lawyers to try and support these people, like it's almost like gangsterism, like they're just dropping it, like no one wants to touch Wheatley. It's like it's really scary how much power this company actually has. So if you were to suggest step-by-step advice on like how to effectively take these people down, do you have any like top tips?
Yeah. Right.
A challenge.
Somebody take out, I want marker pens, big sheets of paper, take notes, everybody.
I would actually start by, I don't know if it may have already been your first sort of step, but in these situations, take pictures, take videos, and don't edit them or anything. Put them up just how they are, because ultimately we need to understand how people's lives are genuinely being affected, and upload it to social media and tag them. And enjoy that, because often what you'll find is they will be very, very quicker than they are to respond to that individual, that tenant. They'll be even quicker to be in the comment section saying, we're so horrified by seeing these pictures, we're going to do everything we can to sort of fix it. But if that doesn't work, why social media is great, because there's a lot of journalists on there. And I'm telling you, if they don't mind sort of tenant groups, tenant organisations, and support in that sense. They're absolutely going to hate journalists, and they will not want, as an organisation, they do not want journalists basically up their backsides. And that's what's helped me with my campaign. And I've got loads of friends now, like I can call them friends now, but I didn't know one journalist before I started campaigning. I didn't even know where to go to find them. They were so I thought they were so far removed, living I don't know where, but I didn't think they were actually amongst us. And there will be loads of journalists in around Glasgow, Scotland, Edinburgh, you name it, across Scotland, who will be willing and wanting to pick up these stories, because it is absolutely horrific. And the benefit for that is people across Scotland are going to hear about this organisation, going to be able to relate, and they will start coming forward complaining about them too. So it won't just be a situation where it's that tenant complaining about them that you're trying to help. It's going to be loads of their other tenants too, because I can guarantee it's not just that one individual that's struggling. I can guarantee that. So that would be my two biggest sort of bits of advice. And then on top of that, you could go a step further and try and doorstep the chief executive. Go out with your phone, with your camera, and doorstep them, show them pictures and ask them what their thoughts are. Find out how much they earn too, because often it's in the hundreds of thousands, and I think it's quite frankly disgusting when you've got people that are living in slum conditions and you're heading that organisation. So, yeah. Shame. Public shame.
Last question, because I think we could have. Are you Kalian? Are you dancing? Are you dancing?
No, I'm not.
You training? Yeah, tonight. Yeah.
No.
Are you basically? I'm asking, can people corner you for more chats? Because I feel like everybody wants to talk more.
Oh, okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm going off afterwards, but as I'm going, feel free to stop me.
Last question.
I was just going to make a statement because I've been through similar situations, and I noticed that, for example, from my own research, you said human rights. We used to be part of the human rights law system, and actually, it was Lord Bingham, one of our chief lawyers, who actually was instrumental in putting that together. However, with the Grenfell situation, with all of these situations, actually getting lawyers, the concept is called the implementation of the object of law or something like that. So there's actually a recognition that, one, there isn't enough what do you call it when you get paid for the lawyering service?
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
Legal aid.
Yeah.
The legal aid system doesn't actually cover housing situations, and lawyers themselves are not taking any accountability to say, let's actually be concerned in the implementation of law. In fact, that they're concerned in the implementation of finance. Do you know what I mean? So that's a real Achilles heel to the whole getting long-lasting justice and change for Grenfell and other places.
It's very true. I mean, the state of legal aid in this country is an absolute joke, and it's only got worse as the years have gone by. And what we find is there's situations where residents and tenants that are struggling find it impossible to find any legal representation. And I've seen that time and time again. I've helped people time and time again where they find themselves in that sort of situation. And as well as that, even on top of that, is we do have no win, no fee sort of solicitors, barristers, lawyers, whatever you want to call them. But there are a lot of them out there too that, like you mentioned, just care about finances rather than the real problem at hand, and what they see as these cases are opportunities to make money. And I mean, the situation is so bad, especially down in London, where now, since I've started campaigning, I've been going on TikTok. I could probably go on TikTok now, and I'm actually bombarded by videos on my For You page of solicitor firms that have taken clips that I've spoken about online on the likes of Good Morning Britain and whatnot, and stuck it on their TikTok For You page, then saying and telling residents that they'll be able to help them, come to them, basically trying to claw in customers and people that are struggling for financial benefit, and using my videos in order to do that. I don't know who they are. They haven't asked to do that. They haven't done anything. I would not recommend half of them to my worst enemy, because I know what some of them can be like. But it makes already hard situations for tenants that struggle to get legal aid and are looking for no-win, no-fee solicitors, but don't know which no-win, no-fee solicitors to go with, because which ones genuinely care and which ones are trying to get a few thousand or see you as a money sort of figure at the end of it. So it is really hard, and what needs to change, there needs to be reform when it comes to legal aid in this country, so that more people have access when they need it, because that's what legal aid is, that's what it should be. People should have, in situations of crisis, access to legal representation. And that's something I'm talking to them about. I've mentioned it to the government. I've written about it in the past. I've spoken on TV.
Just casually in there.
It.
I've mentioned it to the government.
Yeah. Well, both sides too. Both sides, not just one.
Platform as well.
Yeah, but that's it needs to change. Otherwise, we're going to continue seeing this situation and people genuinely, really, really having to struggle in silence.
I think, like, I just wanted to close by saying, like, it's very hard at the end of hearing from you in this moment to say, and that was great. So next, and I sort of feel like you show the art of the possible. It's not easy and it's a lot of slog. And I think what we just need to do is continue to support and uphold and learn from each other, and continue to take that forward to really see what's the next leverage point, what's the next bit we can do, what's the next big class action, what's the next thing that we can collectively come together to do. So just a simple thank you again for sharing. Thanks to everybody, to Kwajo, right?
Thank you. I'm going to say one last thing really quickly. Everyone always asks, like, oh, what could we do or what should we do next? And I think what we all need to remember is there is a general election coming up next year, and we know what politicians are like. Every 4 or 5 years they come out begging us for our votes. So this time, make sure you when you are speaking to them and they are begging you for your vote, you ask them, well, what are you going to do? People are genuinely struggling, and they care about real issues affecting the day-to-day lives of people. They don't care about these fancy sort of golden carrots that you want to dangle in front of our faces and promises that you're not going to be able to fulfill. What are you going to do about people suffering in their homes? They're pushing this whole agenda, and they have done for the last 40 years when it comes to housing, of everyone needs to buy their own home and home ownership. They fail to take into consideration, we've just come off the back of a global pandemic. We've just come off, we're still in a cost of living crisis. People are struggling to pay their bills every month, never mind pay their rent every month in the private rented sector, never mind save up to get onto the property ladder. Yet they're telling us next year, the year after, we're going to miraculously be able to all buy our own homes. For a lot of people and a lot of young people, that is going to be simply unattainable, and that's just the fact, and that's what we need to start admitting. What we need to start seeing housing as a necessity is, if we had stability, security and affordability within the private rented sector, I think the majority of people would actually turn around and say they will happily rent for the rest of their lives, with no need to chase this sort of dream of you need to own your own home one day just to say it's yours, or pay a mortgage off for the majority of your lives, live in your home for 10 years and die. People just want stability, security, and affordability. And those are the real issues, especially now in the current economic climate that we find ourselves in, that we should be demanding from our politicians. So when you are having those conversations, when it does come up to the next general election and they're talking about housing, remember what the real issues are. Remember how people are genuinely suffering. And don't buy into the rubbish that they will promise people that will make no difference to our lives as individuals and the majority of people up and down the country. That is just a fact. And it's a shame that there aren't people in politics just saying it how it is and saying it just like that.
Kwajo for PM.
I won't be able to. I won't be able to. I'll be fired after a few days. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
So back to our girl band pose on here, to say we've come to an end of today. For this part, there is a Kaylee, which I actually don't know what that is, so I'm really looking forward to finding out what happens. So yeah, I'm really excited. But just Sarah and I, we're just going to take a couple of minutes because we're not taking the whole time because we need to change the room and dinner is waiting for you as well. To say a huge thank you to everyone. I'll leave Sarah with the last words, but a couple of things that I just wanted to share with everyone about today was, well, thank you so much just for the warmth. Like every time I come to Glasgow, there is a marked warmth. Like y'all smile and talk to each other, talk to us. Like, trust me, if you're coming from England, yeah, it's just not a Retrofit Reimagined, obviously, but you can really feel the warmth. I want to say a huge thank you for that. But particularly, I think today and across the whole of the Retrofit Reimagined series this year and last has been themes across many different layers, from systemic to practice to like really confronting picture painting of the scales of the challenges we face, combined with incredible, inspiring demonstrations of possibility. And it's been a real mix from the ecological emergencies to the climate emergencies to reimagining our economic possibility to housing, land, materials, people, workshops, getting your hands dirty, building, making, talking. It has been a real breadth of things, which we will unpack more and send more things to you in the coming weeks. But critically for me, I think what has been so important is this really, really healthy dynamic between what it means to be radicalized and politicized and like able to be oppositional and understand like our responsibility within this generation, whilst also this beautiful mix of the propositional, the hope, the futures, the possibilities that we all know are not just dreams but are actually being manifested all over the place. And the balance in every audience and every group of people we've seen to be able to hold these two tensions in reality, but to also not hold them as hierarchies, to be like, oh, we the serious practitioners are not here to be part of that, like, you know, oppositional energy, or the oppositional peeps who are like fighting for rights and justice and dignity and nobility aren't like, hey, you know, and until all of this is sorted, you can't dream of anything else. And I think that tension and that healthy balance and that push and pull with respect to one another has been really, really brilliant. It's been amazing to see the respect between also, like, I want to go and get my hands dirty in hempcrete and, you know, stick my feet in clay. And I want to go and unpack financial instruments for how we retrofit homes.
Well, all at the same time. That'd be epic,
literally, yeah, literally. But my reflections on that, on behalf of so many of us, because we just won't have loads of time now in this closing, is to say that I hope that in the weeks and months to come, we will share lots and ask lots and start to prepare the ground for hopefully this to become even more distributed next year. But I hope that as you go out of here, you'll retain this clarity, this inspiration, this ability to do whatever it takes on your home, street, neighbourhood, community, to bring together people from many different backgrounds, and to understand that we need to be able to sit within these tensions together, and really build, and really to understand where we both need to use our privilege and our positions to fight and to really speak to many of the things Kwajo and others have talked about, but where we also need to make sure that we are not just lost in a system working exactly as it was designed for, which is an article that Charlie wrote this week in the AJ, and completely squashes and burns us out entirely. And actually, we're also making sure that in the most amount of clarity and form, whether it's literally in the knitting group you go to, or the institution you work at, or a mixture of both, or everything in between, or your kid's school playground, or your front garden, or wherever you can gather like a group, that you are absolutely believing in the dignity and hope and nobility and possibility with those around you, to start bringing these ideas and stories to the table and organising around them. And I really, really hope that as you go out of here today, that is not only something you see around you, because you'll know there'll be hundreds of people you'll wish that were in the room today, but actually this is not a small and marginal group of nice community people all over the country. I mean, we are. Flipping it, go to your coffee morning, go do those things. But this is actually a movement of people reimagining and rebuilding what the future is going to look like in communities and neighbourhoods all over the country, from mutual aid to reimagining what value is going to look like, to fighting for one another, to coming together in the worst of circumstances. And for every story we're going to be told about the inevitability of absolute collapse and crisis as a result of particularly our human-made actions in the climate and ecological emergency, for every story that is going to be pushed and divided and thrown down at us, there is another story of which we control. We make what is the social license to operate for the government. We are able to say what we're going to put up with or what we aren't. Right up until the smoking ban, it seemed impossible that would ever happen. And there's hundreds and hundreds of even more important examples than that. And so I do think it's important to hold this kind of love and rage and opposition and proposition in really strong balance. And it's really, really important that we stand up, put our shoulders back and use our privilege to lead, because this generation is really going to need the leaderfulness, not the same powers, not the same story that we've seen that is a complete exploitation of power, but one that actually stands up and claims our responsibilities in making sure that we actually shape and fight for the futures that we want to. And so I really am grateful for the warmth and welcome here in Glasgow, because it really has been an absolute sort of beautiful end to what has been quite a profound few months. And before I pass over to Sarah, I just want to say really particularly thank you to everybody who's been co-organising with us, who has been on the road through floods, through calls every week, to throwing everything they can at it in like tiny pennies of a budget, particularly you guys, because these guys were fifth and there was a flood and we blew all the budget in cat before we came here. So Sarah's been trying to make this happen with crumbs, which we're still going to sort out, don't worry, we're not going to leave her high and dry. But my point is like...
good with crumbs.
But like the amount of love and care, so I'm not going to mention them all because then I'm going to forget someone, but particularly just want to say thanks to Scott here from Anthropocene Architecture School.
Oh, yeah.
We Can Make in Bristol, who some of the team are here as well. Balsall Heath Retrofit, and John Christophers, who I'm sure many of you know to be an absolute hero. All the Civic Square crew that are everywhere and have been all over the place. ACAN, Heel, the 50 hats that Sara wears, the National Retrofit Hub, Bobby Jewell for doing PR, all the people, because I can't...
You said you weren't going to mention
it.
Oh
no, what? This is a slippery slope, isn't it? Right, we better stop, because the food's going to also... the caterers apparently have to leave, and we need to...
Yeah,
anyway,
we do.
So I want to say, just hold the clarity... And please, please, please make sure that this is just the beginning of a journey of seeing, even if retrofit's not there in your, like, the thing that makes you passionate, but remember these big societal challenges and the places in which we live are huge sites of imagination, and we can bring all sorts of magic to them. But on this note, we forgot something earlier, didn't we? So I'm going to pass it over to you and you can have the last word. From me, thank you very much.
Thanks, Amy. I'll keep it really short. Becky Little earlier on in her panel session was midway through, like we were an hour and a half in, there was something like that, and there was a question around retrofit, and she just stopped for a minute and she went, what even is retrofit? What even is that? And I felt in my heart looking at her, I was like, you are? Like the way that she was talking about what she was talking about with their proximity to the land and each other and people, and then it kind of struck me, proximity, that's the word, isn't it? Because like, we're just becoming closer, we're sharing knowledge, we're being respectful. That proximity is kind of hard to ignore each other when we get that close. So I felt like, you know, we know retrofit is relational and it's about that proximity. So I really think that's what we've seen in the room today. And I think, like, as a great example of that proximity, touching back on the collaboration that has brought us here, where we've gotten to now, and which we'll need a massive time to recover from. Some enforced wintering is going to have to happen. But last week at the awards at Best, there was an award around collaboration in the community, and the winners for that, I feel like I've got that moment. And the winners were Retrofit Balsall Heath, and they weren't there, but there's a representative here now, and we have the award. Retrofit Balsall Heath. Who can hear? Who's here? Who's here? Who can join John? Come on up, come on up. This is such a great...
Look, half the crew aren't here, but at least there's Tokir's here somewhere. I don't know if... Tokir, come here. Half the crew is still in Birmingham, but this is a collaborative award. And when I sat down to write out, I think I got to more than 30 organisations that are part of this, and part of them are, where's Imi gone?
Yeah, she sidled off there. Get back here.
As well. This is for Heal. This is for everyone, because this is a huge collaboration. This is, I guess, for everyone in the room. So, cheers for you all.
Congratulations. And much like when Amy closes these things out, and she often will single out Indy Kaur, who Indy can't be here with us because she had an accident. Oh, I'm gonna cry. Thank you, Timmy, because she has changed my life. Oh God, I had to mention Indy, didn't I? Thank you so much, because you are a driving force and you do keep us together. And it is a really valuable thing that you bring to us. So thank you. Damn, you made me cry. Go on.